And welcome to this edition of Conversations. I'm Jeff DeForrest, and once again, I always say this, but this is going to be a special one for me as we are reunited with one of the great pioneers here in South Florida sports history and certainly NHL history. Joined on Conversations this week by the great Doug McLean, who I haven't seen or heard from probably when I was looking up a few things, facts about your past and your history in hockey, I didn't realize it's 30 years ago when you took
Unbelievable.
the reins of the Florida Panthers as their second head coach in behind Roger Nielsen.
Yeah.
How the hell are you, my friend? Good to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's been a fun run. I obviously the Panther run was a special time. Brian Murray and I, and replacing Roger and that group of guys was amazing guys. So it's funny how we sort of stayed in touch over the years with a lot of them. You run into them at different things, and it's shocking to me that even today in Canada and different places, I live in Delray Beach here, and the number of people I run into that talk about the Rats is unbelievable. So it's kind of funny, how it stayed as a pretty interesting time in NHL history.
Well, it was remarkable because you had a third-year expansion team. Now, those accomplishments have sort of been eclipsed by the Las Vegas Golden Knights, and
Right.
that's
Yeah.
another story that we want to get into. Since you were a pioneer and the first general manager and president of the Columbus Blue Jackets, let's start there for a second because they certainly changed the parameters and the guidelines by which they assembled expansion teams, and it seemed like your good friend, who you got his start, Gerard Gallant, was accorded a lot more benefit in coaching that expansion team than even you were with that gritty bunch of guys you had with the Florida Panthers, and certainly when you were trying to put things together for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So, what happened there? That they really
Well,
accorded the expansion teams a chance to have a shot. And we look at the Golden Knights still alive in the playoffs, and
yeah, good
with a chance
franchise.
to go back and win another Stanley Cup. They caught a good break right out of the gate there.
Well, you know what happened? It was pretty simple. The Panthers paid 50 million Wayne Izinga for the Panther franchise, and my owner in Columbus paid 80 million for the franchise in Columbus, and all of a sudden Vegas paid 500 million. So Bettman, and then Seattle paid 650 million, and I hear the next one's going to be over $1 billion next expansion team. So what happened was Bettman said to his group of governors that I think maybe we better do a little more for these franchises that are paying $500 million and give them some real players. Bobby Clark did a fantastic job because they're one of the early franchises that come in, the Panthers. But with Columbus, it was bizarre. I mean, Nashville come in, Atlanta come in, and us in Minnesota come in over a 2-year period, over a 3-year period. So it was scary what we had to pick if the truth was known, and it was a real grind. So Bettman's wisdom, dollars talk, and they made a decision to give the teams a fair opportunity to be competitive right away. And Vegas, George McPhee, Gerard, they did a great job with Vegas, and it's still a great franchise. But it was all about the 500 million. That's what it was all about.
Money talks, nobody walks. All right, let's go back before we get into this year's Stanley Cup Playoffs. I want to get your analysis on what's happened so far, which I don't know if it's more exhausting or exhilarating to see what happens. And and you used to call our shows when we were doing radio back in the days when you were coaching the Panthers,
Yeah.
and we would say something really stupid on the air about the activity in the game the night before, and you would just call us right out from the car and say, "You guys know nothing about hockey, and it's a dressing
Oh,
room, not a locker room." And I still remember those conversations.
yeah, I was way too mouthy in those. And you know what? I do a show every Friday afternoon in Toronto. You know, uh, it's a sports show in Toronto with Sportsnet, and it's every Friday for a half hour. And I'm even more mouthy now that I don't really care anymore.
We thought it was great, and it certainly brought a lot in terms of the enjoyment of what transpired there in that 95-96 campaign. You mentioned the Rats. It just seems so improbable. And then we always talk about this, even the people that aren't necessarily talking pucks all the time say, and I believe it to be true, that the most difficult trophy to win in all of team sports is the Stanley Cup. And you see what a bloodbath it is, even in the first round of these playoffs. An 8 seed can knock off a 1 seed, and it's not uncommon. It's no shock. But the teams you mowed down in that 95-96 run, and it just kept getting more exciting and gathering more momentum with each passing series. I don't remember the exact order, but it was Boston, it was Philadelphia, it was Pittsburgh, all laced with superstars. You're out there with Screwy and Mellenby, and of course you did have the Beezer, who was standing on his head the whole playoffs. But take us back through that and that experience, and as the various series transpired, what your feelings were.
It really was pretty bizarre because, we had a good year. We were a good team. And, I remember my first game that year when I got the job. And look, it was a controversial hire when I got the job because everybody else was talking about Larry Robinson. I'll never forget people in the office with the Panthers. The rumblings were, we got Doug McLean and the Heat have Riley. I don't think that, how are we going to market this, So it was kind of tough. But, we lost the first game in New Jersey 4-1. I remember sitting on the plane with Brian, Murray, and he was shaking his head. And I thought, this is going to be a grind, And then we won the next 5 in a row. All of a sudden, I was all-star coach at Christmas because we were in first place overall in the NHL. And then had a good finish and played Boston in the first round with a really good team. I felt confident we could beat Boston. We had home ice advantage in that series, and I thought we have a real good chance to beat Boston as good as they were. So that was a tough series, but going up against Lindros and Philadelphia, and really the interesting part was Brian's brother Terry was the coach of the Flyers,
right.
And it became a bit of a controversy. And that was a really tough series. I'll never forget Mike Huff scoring a big goal for us in Philly at the Spectrum. And the last year the Spectrum was operating, and Mike Huff scored a big goal. And Niedermeyer was a horse matching up against Lindros as a youngster. And Jovo took a run at Lindros and flattened him in the Miami Arena, which was a big thrill for everybody. So it was just it was an interesting group. I look back at that group, and then we played the Pittsburgh with Mario and Yager and company, and that was unbelievable to win that in 7 games on the road. But that group of players were really special. They really were. And I watched what happened as their careers progressed, and almost everyone to a T did really well in life. They really did. They became hockey people. They became business people. They became executives in different areas. But all of them did really well because they were such a strong character group, a really strong character group. So it tells you a lot about that team and how dedicated and hardworking they were. And they were led by Screwy. And, I'll never forget a great story. We lost in Montreal 7-0 one night. And I was sour after the game, and I said, okay, everybody, 7:00 bus tomorrow morning, meet here at the dressing room, because the boys loved the party in Montreal. That was the party town in those days and still is. And I said, okay, meet here at 7:00 in the morning, and we're going to bus to Verdun to practice. So I come in, I'm sitting on the bus, and they're coming on. They're all hungover looking, they're really they were really pissed off that I made them practice. And Screwy is the last guy to get on the bus. And I'm sitting in the front row, and Screwy gets on, and they had gotten dressed at the Montreal Forum, and we were going to bus over just with carrying their skates. Screwy gets on with his helmet on and a beer bottle taped to the top of his helmet. And I looked at, he said, "Good morning, coach." And I thought, oh my God, he loosened the whole group up, and I couldn't stop laughing. And we went on to have one of the great practices of the year because Screwy set the tone, So they were a really interesting group, to say the least. So I was lucky to get a chance to coach them, to be quite honest.
I still hear the chants. I remember being at the games with my son, who was a young man at the time, and I can still hear Barrasso, Barrasso. It was great, and it was a
Yeah,
small arena, the
yeah.
Miami Arena, and that was the
Oh,
last year that you guys played there, correct?
yeah, it was really wild. It really was. I think we played one more year there after that, and we
Okay.
lost out to the Rangers in the playoffs
Oh,
the
that's
next
right. Yeah.
year. But yeah, 2 years there, and it was fun. We were involved in building the new building and looking at all the, designing the dressing room, and it was sort of a fun experience to go through. But anyway, it was a great time. And then I was 11 years in Columbus, and really had a lot of fun. 24 years in the NHL, and then I ended up doing TV in Toronto for the end of my career, which was a fun job. So
No doubt about it. Yeah, and if anybody would be perfect for it, when I was thinking, hey, who can I ask and see if I can get on to analyze some hockey for us?
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, wait a minute, Doug McLean. That would be the guy.
Jeff Rimmer can't believe you didn't ask him. You
I
know.
did ask him, but he's technically inept, so he can't figure out
Oh,
how to sign on to this thing.
oh no, and you're lucky you didn't get him anyway. He's a pain in the ass.
Of course, a long-time announcer with the Panthers, and then you brought him to Columbus, I guess, when you took over the role there as a GM. All right,
Yeah.
and when you got to Columbus and you're assembling an expansion team, as you mentioned, very difficult because you had several new teams coming into the league in a short span of time. They weren't exactly doing you any favors in terms of who was available in the expansion draft, and what the goalie naturally is going to be the first position that you have to address. But what were some of your strategies in terms of trying to put a team together, and how, if in any way, do they differ from what you would think a GM like a Bill Zito or somebody like that would do today?
Well, you know what? Obviously, it's a similar mindset. You try to find, players that can come in and character type guys. And obviously, the Panthers would sort of set the tone for expansion teams. So you try to do a similar things, quality veteran guys and free agents. And, the challenging part was in our expansion draft, we go in there and you didn't want any of the players available. So basically you were drafting guys that didn't have contracts because you were going to let them go and just try to find your own free agents. I'll never forget,
Yeah.
we signed Ron Tugnut before the expansion draft. He had been in Pittsburgh, and I gave him a 5-year, $10 million deal. And I met him recently. I was up in Canada at Greg Millen's funeral, former NHL goaltender, and I met Tugnut. And I've said on the radio in Toronto lots. I gave him 10 million on his contract, and he's got a boat up at the lake. It's called the SS McLean, because I bought the boat, I guess, for him. So we were laughing about that. So anyway, but you try to build a team. It was really challenging. We had I walk into Columbus, and there was a notepad on the desk, and and I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into here? And we built the arena. I was hired like a year and a half before we started. We built the arena, and we put the whole organization together, hired 250 people. And so it's so funny because I was there a month, and all of a sudden I said to the owner, we need a president here to build out the business side. And he looks at me, he said, you can be the president too. He was 80. And I thought, geez, he thinks I'm running like a Pee-wee travel team here. So I end up being the president. So I'm sitting at home, and I get out the Panthers media guide, and I sit there and I go through the whole Panther media guide. I say, okay, I need a vice president of corporate sales. I need a senior vice president. I need a VP of ticket sales. And so I went through the whole Panther media guide, and that was my model for putting my corporate staff together. So it was pretty bizarre to be, and I think back, I'll never get my kid going to school. And Clark at that time was in grade 3 when we moved up there. He was 9, and he comes home from school and he said, Dad, this isn't going to work here. They hate hockey. They hate hockey. They love football, Dad, and they hate hockey. I said, Clark, don't ever say that again, man. We got to make sure they like hockey. And you know what, Columbus, it's been a tough run as a franchise, 25 years. And I was saying this to Rimmer the other day, 25 years, and they've never won the lottery once.
Wow.
It's just like, talk about so much to a GM job is luck. It really is. I had coffee the other morning with Ron Hextall and Dale Talon and Rimmer here in Delray, and we chatted about it. And you get lucky breaks, like the Panthers getting Forsling on waivers. Astute move by the Panthers, but a bit of a lucky break. And you get Barkov, where you got him, and he's slow developing, but now he's become a star. And Billy's done a really nice job putting the team together, and it's to put the pieces together in today's game with the salary cap is challenging, and they've really done a good job. So it was tough in Columbus. I really enjoyed my 11 years there, and we had lots of fun, and I still talk to guys that worked with me. It's funny how you keep in touch with guys, whether it's the Panthers or whatever. But I'll never forget one of the greatest Panther stories. I'm coaching the Panthers in the final. We had a scout. Ron Harris was one of our scouts from Quebec. I don't know if you ever met Ron. He was an older gentleman. So anyway, when I was playing Montreal Junior Canadiens as a kid, and I take this girl to the game, and it was our first date in Montreal. And anyway, I get in a fight, and John Wensick, who became a crazy tough guy in the NHL, beat the snot out of me, broke my nose in 3 places. So I come out after the game, and I'm 18, and I say to her, you wouldn't drive me to the hospital, will you? And I'll maybe see you in a couple of days. Anyway, so I had to go and get surgery on my nose. Anyway, I never saw her again, and that was the end of that. So anyway, I'm coaching the Panthers, and Ronnie Harris lives in Montreal. Anyway, he goes to cash his check at the bank, his scouting check. So this lady at the bank, he says, he gives her his check, and she said, "Oh, I know your coach, Doug McLean. I dated him and when we were in high school." And so I think, oh my God. So I say to Ronnie, "How'd she look?" He said, "I think you did better. I think you made the right move." So anyway, it's funny how like the Panthers have they've been out there forever in my life. So it's kind of funny,
You mentioned character, and it's interesting watching these various playoffs. We've seen guys that perform really well in the clutch in NBA games, and we've seen guys do disappearing acts like James Harden tends to do. I don't know that you see that. What is different about the internal chemistry? I mean, obviously, a lot of things. You mentioned you broke your nose. You probably still came out there and played the next period. But what is different? The composition of a hockey player is like no other athlete, and we're seeing this in vivid focus as we're watching these even early rounds, the first round of the playoffs. That guy's getting crushed against the boards, hustling back and making plays. What is that? Can you define that? Can you pinpoint that? And how easy is it to spot who really has it when you're looking at putting a team together?
It's funny. I was talking to Jody Hull at the funeral too last week, and I remember I said to Jody, Lindros cross-checked him in the back and broke a couple of his ribs, and I said, and I remember the weight of Lindros's stick. It was like a 2x4. It was, he was a 240-pound guy to begin with, and just a crusher. And Jody was back playing shortly after. Svela, you may remember, cut his mouth all to pieces, and he missed like 2 shifts and come back and played. You know what? It's funny when you go through a playoff series like we did with the Panthers. We didn't have one guy that wasn't banged up. Not one guy that wasn't banged up and wasn't playing injured through that 7 or 8 week period we went. So to win the Stanley Cup is a really special thing. And kids grow up, whether they grow up in Europe now, the US, Canada, wherever they grow up, the Stanley Cup it means a lot to kids. It really does. It's a unique trophy, and it's been around for so long. And for players to get a chance to play for that and ever win it in their careers, really, and we saw it here with the Panthers last year, the genuine excitement of the fan base, just seeing the cup. And so players grow off that, and you know what, they have to pay their dues when you're a young hockey player. It's not easy. It's expensive. Your parents have to make a commitment. The kids make a commitment, and it's changed, but the players are still good guys. As I said, in my whole 24 years in the NHL, I don't know if I ever met a kid. Lots I didn't like how they played, but I don't know if I ever met a kid I didn't like as a person. And I love running into them. I go up to Pine Tree, play golf here, and I run into Ray Shepard there. He's struggling right now health-wise, but Shep, you run into guys all over. Run into Beezer, different places, and Screwy at different golf outings. You run into these guys, and they're special guys. So they pay a big price to play the game. And it's tough. It's hard to play the game. It's tough hockey, especially this time of year. I watched Winnipeg last night. They win with 1.6 seconds left.
Oh,
They're down 3-1. It was a war on the ice, and key guys out of their lineup early in the playoffs, so it's when the playoffs, they go hard. They compete hard, and everybody, it's easy to coach at playoff time because they want it so bad.
people always talk about playoff intensity
Yeah.
in all sports, but
Yeah.
especially so in the NHL.
Yeah.
How different is it? I watch regular season games. It seems to me that they're nailing each other right and left, and these
Well,
games are hotly contested. They're fights, all kinds of activity, extracurricular, whatever you want to call it. A lot of tough stuff, cheap shots, everything is involved. How much different is that level of intensity in the
Well,
postseason?
the regular season is intense because you look at the standings at the end of the year, an 80-game season or 82-game season, and there's teams miss the playoffs by a point. Like it's you look at the races that go down to the wire. Bettman is with the salary cap. It's become total parity in the NHL. There's a couple of really top teams, but overall the teams are pretty even. So you got unbelievable parity in the NHL, and teams fight. I mean, every team, with the exception of maybe two, were right there at the end of the year within a point or 3 points of missing the playoffs. So every game becomes an important game, which is hard to believe over an 80-game series, that you come down to a couple of points separating third from eighth, in the standings. So, I think that has helped the competitiveness, but it's also the guys that play the game that make it competitive. They're hard-nosed kids and quality kids. So we're lucky.
All right. Judging what your goaltender is going to do in a given game as a coach can't be the easiest of things. I mean, these guys are experienced professionals, but I often compare them, I guess, from a mental standpoint. Are they not a lot like knuckleballers?
Oh, well,
I
look.
mean, and what kind of knuckleballers are they in terms of their mental approach? Because you see all kinds of weird quirks. They're sort of
Yeah.
alone and isolated. How do you go about handling a goaltender as a head coach, and who are some of the guys that impressed you the most in recent years?
Beezer was an interesting dude. He wasn't easy to deal with. He was, when he wanted to play every night, and when I didn't play him, he'd be mad at me. He wouldn't speak to me, and Mark Fitzpatrick was our backup, and he was a quirky guy, but a good guy and a talented guy. But Beezer was number one, and he was a distant number two. And every time I used to start Fitzpatrick, we'd do the warm up. We'd come in off after the warm up. Fitzy would take his entire equipment off, everything, right down to even change his underwear, and get redressed and go back out. And then he'd let in a bad first goal. And I said, Fitzy, have you ever thought about maybe leaving your equipment on and not changing, and maybe stopping the first puck? But he was a good goalie. But Beezer was a sane guy. He loved to play. He was competitive. He was a cerebral goalie. Really thought the game. I think of some of the games that guy played for us, it was unbelievable to watch how good he was. And he was 5'7". There's teams in the league today that will not draft a goalie that's under 6'4". It's part of their drafting philosophy. No goaltender under 6'4". And that's how the game has changed. Bees are 5'7". I mean, it's hard to believe. I mean, he was that technically sound. So the game, goaltending has changed. But I look at them. Bobrovsky is an interesting guy. He had a hard time getting over the hump early in his career. Like, in playoffs, he had a tough time in playoffs. And to me, he's one of the main reasons the Panthers won the Stanley Cup. I mean, look, they had a lot of guys playing exceptional, but Bobrovsky has moved to the upper echelon of goaltenders in the game. Without a doubt, he's one of the top, and he's become a focused team leader as well. So goaltending, if you don't have it, you don't have a chance. And I look at, them in Toronto coming up. You got Stolarz, who was the backup here last year, didn't play hardly a playoff game. And he's supposed to carry the ball against, his mentor, Bobrovsky. So that's going to be an interesting matchup in this round between those two teams. But goaltenders, they're lucky to have them. And I was told, actually, it was Dale Talon that told me that Vinny Viola wanted him to sign Bobrovsky, and he wanted him to sign Panarin. They didn't get Panarin. He went to the Rangers and Columbus. but they got Bobrovsky, and it was really the owner that wanted Dale to sign him. So, and I see Dale, and he's a little frustrated because he drafted a lot of those guys, and he loves seeing the success, but deep down, he'd like to still be there. But Billy's done a really good job. So.
Oh, no doubt. I'm
Yeah.
looking at Bill Zito
Yeah.
and thinking, how is this guy not the executive of the year in all
Yeah.
sports?
Yeah.
And we've known the NHL, and we're talking to the great Doug McLean. We've known the NHL was kind of a wild west when it came to trades, and you'll see 18 player exchanges and all kinds of crazy stuff, and stars being dealt that you normally wouldn't anticipate. I mean, the shock you would have thought that registered on the Richter scale when Luka Doncic ended up in the NBA going to LA, but yet you'll see deals with Matt Tkachuk coming to the Florida Panthers, and Huberdeau, who the team had kind of made maybe a little bit of the face of the franchise. And he was coming off a great season, although more of a finesse player, certainly than Tkachuk. And it took some serious chutzpah, as the Jewish slang would go, to go ahead and pull the trigger on that deal. And yet, it seems like with Zito and his success with the Florida Panthers, he keeps adding in this little dabble do you type of piece at the end, including a couple of key transactions that happened after or around the trade deadline. He brings in Marchand. He brings in a couple of defensemen, and all of these guys start making immediate contributions. But when he overhauled the team by trading Huberdeau, well, what was the reaction around the league? And did you think that it would result in the kind of tangible results that we've seen, where the Panthers all of a sudden are again a threat to go right back to the Stanley Cup Final?
Well, you know what? It's really interesting. One of the reasons they were able to make that deal is Tkachuk's agent, and Tkachuk sort of orchestrated it. They wanted to go to Florida. They wanted to go to Florida for whatever reason. He was in Calgary. He was a star there. His contract was expiring, and he basically told the Calgary, "You got to trade me because I'm not re-signing here," which puts a team in a really tough situation. And obviously Zito and the agent were able to work out the deal. And to me, it may have been the most important deal maybe in Panther history, because the Tkachuks and Brady, who's in Ottawa, as the father, Keith, I coached against him for years. They were just, they're so much like their dad. I mean, talent, skill, grit, character, everything you'd want, leaders, everything you'd want in a player. So the Panthers, to get him, to me, was really the number one acquisition in the league in the last few years. And picking up Sam Reinhart, who was a second or third overall pick in Buffalo, and was having problems there, and pick him up. Sam Bennett, a guy in Calgary that everybody, he was a high pick, top 3 pick in the NHL, and everybody knew he was a good player, but they didn't know he had the bite, that he comes with now. Picking up Jones, picking up,
Marchand.
the kid, picking up Marchand was a big deal and a lucky deal. But like even picking up the Forsland on the blue line on waivers, that's not a trade. That's waivers, where Chicago, a team in disarray, still in disarray, let a guy like Forsland go on waivers. And he became the Panthers' best defenseman. The best defenseman in the playoffs, So Seth Jones, big pickup this year. I thought their defense wasn't as good this year during the season, but Jones comes in. I watched. He played 28 minutes the other night. He looks like he's really starting to feel comfortable. So, yeah, there's been some great acquisitions. There's no denying that. And Bill has done a good job orchestrating the cap, and Paul's done a good job coaching.
Maple Leafs been starved for playoff wins, series wins. I think their last series win was when Toe Blank was behind the bench in the 40s or whatever that was. But
Punch Imlach,
yeah.
1967, Punch Imlach won the Stanley Cup in Toronto. Is the last Stanley Cup. Seriously, 67.
You're broadcasting in Toronto. I'm not sure. I guess it would be debatable. I'm thinking because they've won more and have a much richer history of success, that the most coveted franchise to play for and or coach for would be the Montreal Canadiens. But how does that compare with being part of the Toronto Maple Leaf organization. And what do you think their approach is coming into this series? How would you size it up, Doug McLean? What with the familiarity you have with both teams?
Yeah. First of all, both Montreal and Toronto were amazing franchises. I said on the show last week in Toronto, I said, look, I think, to me, the Toronto have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, and it's very simple. All they have to do is, with Trump right now, the Stanley Cup is owned and is originated in Canada. So the Prime Minister's got to put unbelievable tariffs on the Stanley Cup so we do not let it go to the U.S. That may be the only way Toronto wins the Cup.
So Trump's the key then. Never mind the goaltending, Lars.
He's the key. Look, Toronto. I think it's going to be a good series. I think Toronto, physically, the Panthers will go after them, and Toronto have got to figure out how they're going to handle a ferocious forecheck by the Panthers, because they really physically go after you. Toronto's got a much improved blue line with Tanev and McCabe, a shutdown pair. They got Ekman Larsson from here in their second pair with Riley, and then they got two solid guys in their 5-6 hole. And they're big, a bit of a grinding blue line, so that'll be interesting. They've got more depth on the bottom of their lineup than they've had in the past, and they've got big-time talent. I think it's a good series because Toronto can beat you with their pure skill. They've got some Marner, Matthews, Nylander, talented guys, and they've got a little more grit. I don't have them beating the Panthers, but I think it's got a chance to be a good series. I do.
All right, the other series that's going on second round in the East, Carolina and Washington. I was sort of surprised, Doug, that Washington wasn't being accorded more respect. Naturally, I'm looking at it from a bookmaking odds standpoint. Had a real good season, and I wanted you to touch on Ovechkin and his accomplishment this year, of course, of passing the great one in terms of all-time regular season goals, which that was one of those records that was out there, like Lou Gehrig's consecutive game streak. You thought you would never live long enough to see this happen.
I couldn't believe that he did it. I didn't. I mean, I remember 5 years ago talking about this. Like, I said, no way. I mean, this guy's got to get 40 goals a year for the next 6 years. And he's 33, 34 years of age, and he did it for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a great story. There's no denying that. And the Caps had a bit of a fairy tale year. I think they're a solid team. They've got a good young coach there, Carberry, who came from Toronto and paid his dues as an assistant. I think he's a really good coach. He brought the group together. They've added some good pieces there. Carlson's a big horse in the back end. They picked up the kid that was with the Panthers for a long time. His dad does the TV down here for the Panthers. I mean, I think I find Carolina and Washington, to me, if I have to watch it, I will. But if I don't have to watch it, I really am not that much interest in that series, to be quite honest. I find them, I'd rather watch Dallas or Vegas and Edmonton, so I can't watch every game, so I'll be picking. But hey, look, Carolina's got a good team. They're always tough. They always seem to lose when you expect them to win. They run their business really differently there. Their owner makes, he's like the GM there, Tom Dundon. Washington, well-run organization, won a cup a number of years ago. Look, that should be a really hard-fought series. I'm telling you, I don't know who I'd pick in that series. I don't even know who the favorite is, to be quite honest.
Yeah, you would think Washington having the better record during the regular season, but the wise guys always like Carolina. In fact, with my limited knowledge of hockey, although I've been following it since I was a little kid in the 6-team league, I don't know how to assess Carolina, but I always sort of, to sound smart or more intelligent, say, you know what, you better watch out for Carolina. And, based on nothing tangible that I can allude to.
Yeah, it's just a funny. I mean, Frederick, they've got their goaltending is always suspect. It's cost them big time, and they keep staying with the same goaltending group. Aho's a star up front. I mean, the one thing they have going for them is Rod Brindamore is one of the best coaches in the NHL, bar none. He's one of the best coaches, and I think he's the biggest reason that they stay competitive and near the top. So it'll be fun to watch. But honest to God, I don't know who I'd pick. I probably would pick Washington to win the series, but it's a pick 'em for me.
I always have this image whenever you mention Ovechkin or his name comes up. I mean, just sort of on the left side there by the face-off circle, taking that one timer, and it seems
Oh.
like 90% of his goals come on that move. As a coach, can you pay too much attention to one guy, or can you devise a strategy to stop one guy? And would you think that that would be a key for Carolina, is to somehow try to put a net over Ovechkin and limit what his effectiveness is?
Yeah, I mean that will be the number one strategy going into the series, is how we've got to contain him. And really, 5-on-5, he's not nearly as dominant as he was. His domination really comes off what you just described. Playing that soft spot on the power play where he can get his one-timer away, and he's got one of the best shots in the game. And he beats goaltenders one-on-one with the shot and the one-timer, and it's deadly. So, obviously, you do everything you can to take him away on the power play, but they've also added some other players that are pretty effective. That if you put too much pressure on covering Ovi, there's other people that can hurt you. And Ovi dishes the puck pretty well. They got big shooters from the back end. So it'll be a fun series, but it doesn't really excite me, to be quite honest, compared to Toronto and Florida. And you got Edmonton and Vegas should be a great series. So we'll see. Dallas is going to be really tough to beat as a team. To me, Dallas, Florida are still my two teams I think have the best chance to win the Cup this year.
I always liked Dallas when they had Hitchcock as coach, because it was one of the few times that the novice hockey observer could actually see plays that looked like they were designed. A lot of it looks like just anarchy out there, and yet we see the skill level makes it so that the passing is so crisp and all of the different things that go on. But Dallas really seemed to be a very disciplined team with Hitchcock as coach. How would you size up Peter DeBoer? He's had success in a lot of places. And, of course, we're familiar with Peter DeBoer from being here with the Florida Panthers, and then he's had success in a few other stops on the tour. Sort of a quiet, reserved guy. I mean, not one to attract a lot of attention. Seems very calm in the way he goes about his business. What does he bring to the table in terms of chance?
I think he's I don't think he's a technical coach. You mentioned Hitchcock and other guys in the league that are technical. I think he's a pretty low-key coach. I think the players like playing for him. Number one, he's always, since the Panthers, which was probably his first NHL stop, he's ended up with really good teams. He had a good team in Jersey. He had a good team he's got a good team in Dallas. He had a good team in San Jose. He had a good team in Vegas. So he's had really good teams. But what he does, he's a big-time straight shooter, and I think the players have a lot of respect for him as a one-on-one guy that helps team chemistry. So I think that's his strength. I think that's his biggest strength. He's got good technical people with him, and I think, but he's a guy that the players like to play for. And if you can be tough on guys and they still like to play for you, you've accomplished a lot in the NHL, because it's not usually like that. A third of them hate your guts, a third of them tolerate you, and a third of them really like you. That's the model, So if you can get a little more than a third liking you and want to play for you, you've had success. But Peter, I mean, I couldn't believe it the other night. I think he's 9-0 in Game 7 series, and they had a big win the other night with. Big comeback in the third period with Rantanen scoring a hat trick. And, so Peter's record in Game 7s are unbelievable when you think about it, 9-0 in his career.
Both of these teams, Winnipeg and Dallas, but we're looking at putting the golf clubs, and taking them out of the garage and get ready for vacation. How much of an inspiration, how much of a spark do you think that will provide for these two teams, especially as they clash in Game 1 in Winnipeg? What kind of impact would that have? Or are they just so exhausted that you'll be lucky to see them be able to stand up after those two-game series?
Winnipeg had a season like Washington, where they were really a good regular season team, and Hellebuck was maybe the MVP of the league, their goaltender, Hellebuck. And in this series, he's really had major problems in the playoffs, Hellebuck, getting wins. A bit of it to do with his team, but also a bit to do with him. And then he lets in a couple of bad goals last night, and all of a sudden they're down 3-1. They score with 1.6 seconds left to tie the game and win it in double overtime. Dave Lowry's son gets the winning goal. I put out a tweet after saying, Dave, obviously, and I know Dave's son. He used to be a little kid running around the Panther dressing room. Now he's the captain of the Winnipeg Jets, and he's a horse. And I said, he's just like his old man, character, grit, determination, and he scored the winner in overtime for the Jets. So the Jets are a good team if Hellebuck can get by. I mean, he wasn't good in the first round. I thought he was going to cost them the series, and he didn't. He stumbled in the Four Nations Cup, where he was battling against Bennington, the same guy he played last night. If Hellebuck has a round against Dallas like he did in the regular season, an MVP, then it'll be a relatively close season. They're hurting. Scheifele's out with an injury. Maurice went out 2 minutes into the game, their best defenseman last night. So they got to get healthy, and Dallas is a real good team. By the way, Dallas won their first round against Colorado without their best defenseman, Heiskanen, and Robertson, one of their best forwards. And they won the series without having them. And they're both back ready for this round. I think Dallas, like I say, Dallas, Florida, to me, are the two contenders. But you know what? It's really hard to pick. It's hard to pick who's going to win.
It did seem that way going in. You could probably throw an umbrella over.
Well, I was in Vegas. I was out in Vegas. Jill and I went to Vegas for 3 or 4 days, and I ended up meeting George McPhee, the president GM of Vegas, and talking in the stands in the warm up. And he told me that night, he said, Doug, I think there's 11 teams that have a chance to win the Stanley Cup this year. 11 teams, which is hard to believe.
Sure.
And that's what he said. It's that close, and there's that many good teams. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Another series, and the last one that's still up in the second round. You mentioned Vegas and Edmonton. Edmonton loses the first 2 games to the Kings. The Kings have to have nightmares about the Edmonton Oilers. Seems like they eliminate them every year. They had a good season. You got McDavid and Draisaitl, a lot of stars there on the Edmonton Oilers who roll in on a 4-game winning streak in the postseason. How do you size that one up?
Well, it's really hard to go against McDavid and Draisaitl with how talented they are. I mean, McDavid is by far the best, most skilled player on a mission to win the cup. I just don't think they're goaltending. Skinner stumbled in the first round. They had to go to Pickard, the backup, and he saved them 1-4 in a row, to after they were down 2-0 to LA. Skinner is going to start the series. He's really had a tough year. They're just not deep enough. You guys saw them a lot in the playoffs last year where they fall behind 3-0 and then they battle back and make it a series because McDavid carried them on his back, to be quite honest. And Skinner was good, but I don't see them. I hate to say it. I don't see them as a real cup contender, but when they've got those guys, you can't ever underestimate that, So Vegas, it wouldn't surprise me that Vegas is a little bit older, a little bit slower team. They've had some deep runs. I think Vegas will have their hands full with Edmonton. But it's going to be a heck of a series. Like you got Eichel versus McDavid. I remember talking to Tim Murray, and Tim Murray was a GM of Buffalo in that draft year, and all of a sudden it was win the lottery, you get McDavid, and you finish second, you get Eichel. And you look today, and I remember Timmy saying to me, it was not even close. McDavid was so much better than Eichel, it's scary. And then all of a sudden you see, at this point in their careers, both of them started at the same time. Eichel's got a Stanley Cup, and McDavid doesn't. And I agree with him. McDavid's that much better. But Eichel's a hell of a player and a hell of a leader in Vegas since he left Buffalo and went there. But look at the guys that have left Buffalo. Reinhart, Eichel, and they go places and become stars. Cousins goes to Ottawa this year. He was a top 5 pick or so in the draft. They trade him, and he goes to Ottawa, and he's a star. So, they've lost some. Buffalo has really lost some great players, which is sad to see. But anyway,
The
That's the way it
long-suffering
is.
Sabres. All right, how much?
Oh,
How
there's
much?
14 years there's 14-year-olds that have never seen a playoff game in Buffalo, for God's sake.
And of course, they lost all those Super Bowls in succession with the
Yeah,
Bills, and always seemed to fall a little bit short.
yeah.
Coaching matchup. How much of it is you versus the opposite coach, and how much of a factor is that in these kind of games?
It's important. The Toronto Florida series will be interesting. You got a Stanley Cup winner in Berube, who won it with St. Louis, and he's a solid coach, and he's a tough guy, I remember coaching against him when he was a player, and he was a battler, fighter, tough guy. Paul Maurice is interesting. He won the Stanley Cup. He's one of the top coaches in the league with wins, and he's got more losses than any coach in NHL history. So he's got a lot of wins, and I don't know if he's fourth or fifth in wins and number one in losses, but it's just been a really good fit for him in Florida. So you got two good coaches going head to head. I wouldn't say one's better than the other. I think they're pretty even, but yeah, matchups are really important. How you figure out who you're going to play against, what defense you're going to match up against Barkov and company, how you're going to shut down the power play, how you're going to deal with Kachuk. There's lots of intriguing aspects of the series for coaches to be heavily engaged in.
It always fascinates me, though. I mean, you'll see a coach in the NBA calls a timeout, and then maybe he throws another player out there on the court. You don't have that when you're coaching in hockey. And what amazes me, I mean, just like a well-orchestrated and well-run machine, how these guys know when they're in and they're out. I mean, where do those decisions come from?
Well, the way it works is you say, okay, going into the series, Kachuk's line, you're going to play against, I'm going to match you up versus so-and-so. And, so the guys are alert on the bench. If you do the matchup, some coaches just roll the three lines and figure out the fourth line. But lots of time it's defense pairs that match up against certain individuals. Like Toronto will try to match Tanev and McCabe up against the Barkov line, I would suspect. So, that's how so the guys are alert on the bench. And when they see the Barkov line go, if your coach has said this is going to be our matchup, then they're going. They're going on the fly, as the others come to the bench. So it's not that complicated. But you have a pretty solid game plan with respect to matchups going into it. And the players are really alert to that.
How much input do you get from your assistant coaches when you're on the bench there?
You get a lot. I mean, the assistant coach, when I was with the Panthers, I had Lindy Ruff as my assistant coach, who went on to have an amazing head coaching career. Lindy was terrific. I mean, he had a great feel for the players. The players liked him, and he handled the defense, and he was exceptional. We became great friends, and he's had a great career. He got his 900th win this year, which I had sent him a note there a few weeks ago congratulating him. And I had Dwayne Sutter, who was a solid hockey guy. And, Billy Smith was our goalie coach. Like, seriously, what a staff that Brian Murray really put together, So, and Bill Torrey. So, the assistants are really important. They're a really important part of the package, to say the least. They do a ton of work. And lots of times the assistant coaches handle the special teams, the power play, penalty killing. Head coach oversees it, but it's really the assistant coach that really is the technical guy doing a lot of the detail work.
Oh, it's funny, Doug. You mentioned Paul Maurice. We couldn't have misjudged him any more badly. You were talking about how when you got hired, and I was thinking about it. You mentioned the other coaches. The Heat had Pat Riley. The Dolphins had Jimmy Johnson.
Oh, Jimmy Leland.
Yeah, Jim Leland was the Marlins manager, and they were talking about, look at this, we got the Mount Rushmore of coaches, and your name was mentioned, as they say in A Clockwork Orange, and that's a nice company to keep. But
listen,
we were thinking, who is this loser, Paul Maurice? Like you said, knowing nothing about his history and the fact that he also was among the more winning coaches in hockey history, and we didn't know that. I mean, maybe eclipsed only by the last time the Caps. And won the Stanley Cup. Was that their only Stanley Cup? They had Bruce Boudreau, one of my favorite coaches, behind the bench, because every other word was a four-letter curse word. And we didn't know that Paul Maurice had this personality where he brought out his inner Joe Pesci after winning
Yeah,
the Stanley Cup.
yeah,
I would imagine you know him well, and I'm thinking the calm demeanor that he usually displays
yeah.
probably is a real a job on his part of kind of suppressing the real Paul Maurice, which is a little more of a wild man than we would have ever figured. We thought he was the French Joe Philbin, with no personality, and he turns out to be great.
Well, it's funny. He was in Winnipeg, and he left. He couldn't. He people tell me he was fired in Winnipeg. He tells everybody he quit because he couldn't motivate them. So I don't know the truth.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between. But anyway, I was a little surprised when he got the Panther job too. And you know what? Uh, I think he's taken a big step since he came. Look, it helps that you've got a really good team and you've got a physical team, and Paul's a smart guy. He's a good guy. He calls it the way it is. And, he's got that famous where he snapped in a game, somewhere late in the season, and it seemed to spark the team. But it's been a really good fit, a really good fit. And Paul started coaching in the NHL at 28 years of age. I mean, he went from junior in Plymouth, with Plymouth, Michigan, at 28 years of age, got the Hartford Whaler job. So he's been a lifer. He's been a lifer, and he was in and out. He's been with a number of teams, and then he would go out and do TV, and then he'd come back in and coach. So he's been a lifer, and it was good to see him win last year.
You mentioned the motivational aspect. I always love
Yeah.
the story Jim Valvano tells about how he was going in for his first locker room pregame speech, and he was watching Vince Lombardi talking about how winning isn't everything; it's the only thing, and all of the
Yeah.
motivational stuff that he used. And so he said when he went into the locker room the first time, he's addressing the team, and then as he's getting more and more fired up, he says, "And now let's go out there and beat the Bears." uh, how did you handle that in terms
I,
of being a motivator with pregame speeches and
uh,
inspirational stuff that happens between periods? Because it seems like the coaches kind of leave the players on their own in between periods from inside the dressing room shots that we see.
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of funny. Anyways, a funny story there when I was coaching and we had the Big Four here in Florida. They called it the Big Three with Leland and Johnson and Pat Riley. And I remember they had a big article in the paper on the four of us, and they showed our salaries. And Jimmy was making 2 million, and Pat Riley was making 2+ million, and Leland was making 1.6 million, and I was making 450, and which I was
Isn't bad.
thrilled.
Yeah.
Which I was thrilled with.
Yeah.
And my kid goes to school, and all the kids at school are teasing him. Oh, your old man's really underpaid. The kid come home, and he was devastated. What's going on? You don't make any money, Dad? I said, no, we're doing all right, bud. So they were a pretty unique group. But anyway, you know what? The coaches between period. Look, the pregame, you're always trying to come up with thoughts, but it's motivational, but the motivation is really done individually. It's done in practice. You come in and you try to give a pregame talk and hit on the key factors that you want to address in the game. And then it's in between periods, you could have video clips that you show there, that the video staff put together on certain aspects of the game that you want to look at. And the coach just, again, reemphasizes the game plan. So they are engaged between periods. They are engaged on the bench, but it's it's such a fast-flowing game. It's not like football where you can dictate and do the set plays, and even in basketball the set plays. It's a fair amount of is freelancing, but you have your basic premise as to how you want your team to forecheck, how you want to play in the neutral zone, and a good solid defensive system in your own zone. A lot of teams are the very same. You could watch game after game and see very similar systems, but it's who executes the best that's the difference.
All right, you've been very generous with your time, but we want to put you on the spot a little bit. You're in the commentary business now, so you're probably accustomed to this. Who meets in the finals, East and West, and not the conference finals, but the Stanley Cup Finals, and who comes away with the trophy?
I've got the Panthers and Dallas in the finals, and I've got I think the Panthers are going to have their hands full, but with Bobrovsky and Kachuk and Barkov and experience, I wouldn't surprise me the Panthers win again.
All right, it'd be wild too, because we had so many years between the time you took us to the here in Florida, the Stanley Cup Final, and we were mired in mediocrity. In fact, the big joke was always, at what point in December will the team be mathematically eliminated from the postseason?
Well, it was pretty funny. Last year, Paul Maurice, I held the most playoff wins since 96, and it was broken by Paul this past year. Most playoff wins by a coach. So I'm now number 2. That's how bad they've been.
Doug, a pleasure. Now you're headed for what? Prince Edward Island? Because you're known as, what was the nickname? Prince Doug?
Prince Eddie. So
Prince Eddie.
I don't know where that came from. But anyway, no, we go up there. We spend 7 months here in Delray, and we're going to take a couple of weeks to get there, and then we'll spend 4.5 months up in PEI, Prince Edward Island, for the summer. So we love Delray, and we love Prince Edward Island in the summer. So it's a great combination.
All right, send us down a dozen oysters, and
mussels, oysters, lobster. I mean, so whatever became of Joe Rose? I mean,
he's still going.
I was on with him a couple of times, but I've lost touch. But anyway, used to have a lot of fun with you guys.
Anyway. Yeah, it was great. Well, Steve Goldstein, of course, became the Panther TV play-by-play.
Yeah.
A monster evolution in his career. Joe Rose is still doing morning drive radio.
Wow.
On WQAM, where we were all assembled there together as the first team back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was great.
I'm driving Uber at night to try and make ends meet so I can pay my homeowners association fees, which escalated out of control here in South Florida. So.
Oh, it's crazy. I know. Well, I'm with you. It's tough sledding.
Yeah, I got to keep working. Doug, I can't thank you enough. A pleasure catching up with you. I always enjoyed all of our conversations in the past, and I especially enjoyed this one as we had a chance to reconnect through our mutual friend, Jeff Rimmer. And we'll see if Rimmer can punch Google Chrome and get on the show. You didn't seem to have any problem.
Anyway, great to hear from you too, Jeff, and good luck, continued good luck, and appreciate the opportunity to BS with you. It was fun.
All right. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Doug McLean, with us here on Conversations. That was a lot of fun. Wow, great stories. You talk to any guy that was in the NHL, and I don't care what sport you're discussing. I mean, there are many, many interesting people. I was watching sort of a casual interview, conversations type thing with George Brett the other day, and the guy was hysterical. You wouldn't have known it. The last time we thought of him as being hysterical is when he had the pine tar incident, but couldn't have been any more compelling in terms of the things that he was bringing up about Major League Baseball in his career. And almost anybody that you go to in hockey, that there seems to be a synthesis there, a bond among the players that spans any amount of time. And sure enough, there was Doug pointing out that still very much in touch with those guys from the 95-96 Panthers season, which ended in a 4-game sweep. You would have thought they won the Stanley Cup the way things happened, but mowing down the teams they did on the run to the Stanley Cup Final, very much what we're seeing today, where it's just a very treacherous road. And you have to have a lot of talent, but you also have to have a little bit of luck. So we'll see what happens tonight. Second round gets underway tonight on this Monday when we're doing a show with the Toronto Maple Leafs trying to distinguish themselves once again. And the Florida Panthers going at it. And Doug McLean saying Panthers probably going to make their way to the Stanley Cup where they lose to the Dallas Stars. Maybe in yet another Stanley Cup final bloodbath. All right, thanks so much for being with us. For Doug McLean, I'm Jeff DeForrest. We'll catch you on the next edition here on Bleacher Brothers of Conversations.